Good evening. Thank you for joining us for tonight's Justice Now conversation. We'll be getting started shortly. Please chime in, drop a comment, and let us know where you are dialing in from. Good evening. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll be getting started shortly. Hi, Majora. How are you?
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm well. Looking forward to this conversation.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. Thank you to everyone who has joined us. Please feel free to drop a note in the chat to let us know where you are dialing in from. We want to know where in the world you are, but we are really looking forward to this conversation. And our second guest, who's right down the hall from me, will be joining us shortly. Really looking forward to having Sai on with us. One moment. Let me see if I can send him a request.
I saw Cheryl Dorsey. Hello, Cheryl.
We see Detroit's in the house.
Hello. Hi, Richard. Hi from Nashville. Hi, guys. Hi, Center. Yay.
Oh, greetings from Ohio. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in and joining with us. Okay, Kingston, Jamaica, Majora,
What?
looks like you have, wow, I love it.
Okay, maybe I should put on my glasses so I can actually see what people, where they're from. Hampton Roads. Okay.
Do it again. See?
Who's BX all day? Hello, President Vicente. BX all day. I'm with you. Oh, wow, is this nice?
Oh, I love it. You're getting so much love in the chat.
Oh. Hello. Oh, it's Audrey. Audrey Peterman. Hi. She's like my godmama. Oh, this is beautiful.
Oh, I love this. Majora is my shero.
Link.
Reclaiming your community is a game changer.
Miss Michelle.
Oh, I love this Houston Urban League Guild.
Oh. JKL Man Designs. Tip the Tax Lady. Miss Michelle Lang. Oriel. Arp Jeffries. LLC. Thank you. So glad you're here. Live for Change LLC, Matt Trust, Kie Martin, Oriel, Lacey High, hope I said that right, and YBP Media Solutions in the building. Spooky Rainwater, Cocoa Puff 7, Ken Cax, or I can't see the photos, but I get the feeling I actually know a bunch of y'all. I just can't see them. Like my readers just don't get that good, guys. Sorry. Tiffany Cape Hart Realtor. Hello, I know you from Nashville. Blake Bell, Miss Michelle Lang. I'm so excited to start. Mark over.
Well, why don't we get started?
Okay.
I think Sai is having some technical difficulties on his end, but I think he just needs to update his IG app. And so I'm sure our colleagues on the other end will help him do that so that he can restart and come back in.
Okay.
See, I'll send him one more invite.
And Aura, Jasmine, the creatress. While you're doing that, I'll just keep saying hello to everybody.
Okay.
Thank you all. Marcel, Gold and the Navigator. Oof. Dr. CNG. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. CN Goodwin. DJ Spaz New York Knicks, Mark Overall, Zippy Wonderland Lizard, Saeed. You are not, are you my banker? 2025. I'm not sure.
Oh, I see Hunts Point. I know Hunts Point is definitely going to be excited. Okay.
I got everybody.
So,
thank you.
So welcome, Majora. I'm so glad you're able to join us this evening. And I want to say welcome to everyone who has tuned in for tonight's Justice Now conversation, sponsored by the National Urban League. I am your host. I know you see me on every few weeks, Jerica Richardson, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the League. So tonight we are really focused on an important issue, reclaiming the American dream. And how do we do that? One of the reasons that we have Majora on and Sai, who will join us shortly, is because we want to focus in on bridging the racial wealth gap through home ownership and community wealth building. And my team shared an important stat with me. 2/3 of America's middle class wealth is in the form of real estate. And so not only does home ownership help stabilize our neighborhoods, it also promotes increased social, civic engagement and improves quality of life. So I really just want to lay that down as our framework this evening. And here to join me for this important conversation is Majora Carter. And so as we've seen in the chat, a lot of you are familiar with Majora, but for those of you who might be seeing her or hearing from her for the first time, Majora is a real estate developer, an urban revitalization consultant, and an author. So you are many things, Majora, and I know that you have a wealth of knowledge and information to share with our viewers this evening. So let's jump right in, shall we? So what are some of the reasons you really decided to get involved in this work? Majora, would love to hear a little bit more from you about your work, your background, and why this issue is so important.
Yeah. You know, first of all, I didn't try to get involved in this work. This was not something that I wanted to do. As a matter of fact, I was one of the kids. I grew up in the South Bronx, literally as it was burning. It's like we were the poster child for urban blight in the 70s and 80s. And I was like a lot of kids, who grew up in neighborhoods like that and was led to measure our success by how far we got away. And it was brain drain was real. I didn't want to be in my neighborhood. I felt like we were like a national joke and didn't want to be associated with it. And so that I'm in this work now, that I'm literally using a talent retention approach to community development in neighborhoods like mine but it's just God, frankly, because otherwise I don't think it would happen. But I really do feel committed to the idea that we can build successful communities from the inside out, and especially in the kind of communities where we're led to believe that you need to measure your success by how far you get away from them, by actually creating the right kind of infrastructure. And so much of that really is about the kind of economic infrastructure and human capital that makes people feel as though their neighborhoods are worth staying in and investing in emotionally, as well as financially, for themselves and their future.
Sorry, I'm in the city and we can hear, hopefully not too much on your end, the fire trucks behind me. But I really would love you to expand a little bit more on talent retention and the brain drain that we see in so many communities. I know, that you're obviously based in the Bronx, and I know there are a lot of folks from Hunts Point and others that are on, and so excited to hear from you. But can you go a little bit deeper into that point, Majora?
Yeah, sure. So if you think about it, successful communities, successful businesses, or even not so successful ones, they work to keep the talent, like their employees, so that they can feel like they can like lean into the mission or the goals of that organization or company. And we, in the kind of communities that I spend my time working in, you really don't see the kind of folks where you're investing in your employees, you're investing in the people in your company so that they stay and then reinvest themselves and their talent into it. And I believe that you can actually build successful communities and invest in the people that are in them so that they feel as though they can actually invest, but also get something out of being in those neighborhoods. And so we call the kind of communities that I tend to work in low status. And it's not that they're low status doesn't mean there's somehow like something wrong with the people there. It's more about the way that people from both inside and outside those communities view those neighborhoods. Inequality is assumed by people from the
Mhm.
inside in terms of health outcomes, educational attainment, your poverty rates, it's their incarceration rates. Everyone just assumes that there is an unequal status, and things in those areas are less than other places. So, and it's an ugly truth that nobody really wants to acknowledge. But if you look at the way those neighborhoods are developed, you see it. You can't help but see that the way that the housing is built, in low status neighborhoods, the type of economic developments that are brought in there, the fact that less people actually own their own homes and
Mhm.
local businesses. Those are low status communities, and everybody knows what they look like, even if nobody wants to actually admit that there's inequality at play. And I feel like our approach to community development and using a talent retention lens is all
Mhm.
recognizing that if we created the right type of infrastructure in the environment that made people feel like, yeah, you know what? I want to stay and keep, my family's old home. Like, I'm not going to sell it to some predatory speculator who calls me up and basically convinces me that my community, and therefore by association, this house is not something that I want to keep for my family. And unfortunately, that is the way we see this happening all over this country. I think I don't, because I honestly do not believe that the first, time gentrification happens is when you start seeing, things like cute coffee shops or um, doggy daycares in places where you never saw them before. It starts happening when people in our own neighborhoods start to believe that there's no value there and act accordingly.
Well, I mean, the fact that we're just talking about and seeing really the underinvestment. I mean, we have to be honest, so much of it comes from bias and structural racism. Um, and but I think you're taking a much different approach to it. I would love to hear more from you because we hear it in hip hop music and we hear it in all the songs all the time. Jay-Z, Nipsey Hussle, they always talk about buying the block. And
Mhm.
Majora, you and the Majora Carter group really have been doing that in the Boogie Down. I would love to hear more about that.
Yeah, well, I certainly tried to do it on a personal level to start, and not because I really felt like that I didn't have the kind of awakening that I've had over the past several years, that it is about wealth generation, for our community and keeping, economic prowess within our own neighborhood. It really, that my first blush was all about just like I needed a roof over my head and found a cheap place to stay. But the more important part is that there is systemic bias like, in housing, in banking that does affect us. But what we're trying to get to is the what's underneath it, which
Mhm.
has a lot to do with people in neighborhoods that are already underinvested in, feeling that and therefore acting accordingly. So if we don't believe that our neighborhoods are worth it, yeah, and that, that phrase, white ice is colder or
Yeah.
white sugar is sweeter, you know,
Mhm.
like, oh, we don't want to be in our old hood. And we're going to try when we grow up and be somebody, we're going to go and invest in some other neighborhood.
Which is continues just to take all the resources instead of making,
Precisely.
right,
Exactly.
our homes the place to be, our neighborhoods the place to be, because they're so rich in culture,
Exactly.
um, in art. There's so many brilliant people that have come through these
Yep.
spaces and places.
Yep.
I mean, so much. I mean, if we're talking about the Bronx, this is the birth of hip hop,
Exactly.
right? This should be a destination where people want to
Exactly.
go.
And
And if we don't love on
that
it, you know.
destination needs to be the places that we own, right?
Hmm.
And I can speak from also personal experience. I'm the youngest of 10 kids. You know, my parents moved here in the 1940s. I could not get my siblings to hold on to our family's home when both my parents died. And because they were already left the neighborhood, they didn't want anything to do with it. They thought it was cute that I was doing the community thing, but they were not trying to stay up in the South Bronx because to them, this wasn't a great place to be. It just wasn't. And, you know, now, of course, the house is worth 3 times what it was sold for. That could have been, you know, my nieces and nephews, you know, they could have been
Right.
their generational wealth. I mean, I don't have no babies, so I'm not worried about it. But everybody else does. And I think about that, you know, and how we're really quick because, again, we have to sell it to them. I mean,
Mhm.
sometimes, yeah, there is the bias of like, there's all sorts of very unscrupulous things happening in our industry, in the industry. But, you know, but I honestly believe that if we felt as though our communities were worth investing in, it would be much, much, much harder and to take away, you know, our capacity to even stay in our homes, because sometimes we have to also admit to ourselves that sometimes we do give it away. Like, again, my family did that. Like, we
Yeah.
did not have help, and my family is not alone in that. And so we've got to recognize that and then set the policies and really be pushing for the type of policies to prevent that kind of stuff from happening, especially when there is a real systemic bias going on that keeps people from actually being able to stay in their home. So it's definitely a two-pronged thing that we have to be mindful of.
Yes, and the sad part is we just have so many folks that are profiting off of our legacy.
Mhm.
I see one of the comments, and I think we're going to be joined by Sai soon, but it says the younger generations that for the younger generations, some aren't putting much weight on home ownership. They're waiting later because of cost.
Mhm.
Um, so I'd love for you to speak to that in 1 second, but I want to welcome our second guest for this evening, Sai Richardson, my colleague here at the National Urban League. Hi, Sai.
Hey, Jerica, and I'm so ashamed and embarrassed. We have such a rock star on here in Majora, and I'm crap in the bed, as they say. So with the technology, um, you all deserve better than me. But your team has been on it, Jerica. Sorry to join late.
No worries. For all of you all that have tuned in, we have Cy Richardson, who is a Senior Vice President of Economics and Housing Programs at the National Urban League. So Cy lives this every day. I'm so excited to have both him and Majora on. Cy, we were talking a little bit about buying the block, right? And Majora is living and doing that every day in the Bronx, and would love to kind of get your take and hear from you a little bit about the importance of home ownership and investing in our communities, especially in times like this. We have so much promise, I think, in our communities across the country. But as Majora mentioned, there's been kind of messaging and information shared that makes so many people feel like our communities are less desirable. And then folks leave, but then others come in and really are able to profit and expand on some of the richness that already exists there.
Mhm.
Well, I mean, I think that's right, and in many cases, it's part of an intentional and structured, by design, kind of cabal between units of government in many cases, private sector actors, and speculators, who, again, this is just the latest phase of a long enduring legacy, and the effects of de facto and de jure segregation. I mean, we have the effects of segregation laws, restrictive covenants, racial steering, and redlining. I'm sure Majora, can speak about these things. I mean, the Bronx has been ground zero for some of these pathologies in terms of urban development and community building. But I think that the key thing for us is, we have to really deal with arresting the knowledge gap. We
Yeah.
talk about the wealth gap. We talk about the home ownership gap, which accelerates the wealth gap. But really the antecedents for all this is built around the knowledge gap. And I think it's important that we meet communities where they are, but in many cases, these policies are happening to communities. And I think that is something that got me interested in this work from the beginning, which is the feeling, the palpable feeling of disempowerment, really rooted in kind of uneven access to education. I don't mean formal education. I'm talking about the rules of engagement, or the how land use decisions are made, and the impact of private sector policies. We all talk about elected officials and their public policy decision, but in many cases, that's being driven by private sector actors. And in most cases, communities and community actors, community leaders are not aware of where the leverage points are, where the different vectors of influence come from. And it's typically not immediately City Hall. It isn't, corporate C-suites, folks understanding. They used to draw literally red lines around communities. This is where we get the term from, as inartful as it is. But I think this kind of interaction between public and private sector interests and how money and land change hands before the community residents know about or know how to hold the line and as bulwarks, that's kind of the intersection where the Urban League exists, empowering communities so that they can have a say and role in the ultimate outcome for their communities and neighborhoods, not kind of the investment that's measured in dollars and cents, but what these neighborhoods have gone on to do in providing healthy places for people to raise families and for people to grow intergenerational wealth through home ownership. And my challenge really is to, put people's feet to the fire. We have most of our banking partners are on our board, Jarek, as you know, and we have to leverage our relationship to them to be able to explain in real terms. Turf is important, block by block, census tract by census tract, but we're in the business of educating and empowering communities so that they have an active say, agency in what happens to the communities where they have lived for generations. And it is a shame, in fact, it's tragic, dare I say criminal, how some of these communities have changed hands, and what used to take a generation or two now can be done with a stroke of a pen and can be achieved in months and years, the fabric, texture, contours of neighborhoods and communities. And that's something we're trying to empower communities. I mean, Majora's in the Bronx, she knows, other organizations like Nostradamus, we stay, right? This notion of rootedness in communities, and that's kind of what we're trying to pass on through the Urban League's work.
Yeah. I mean,
and Bajora, definitely jump in. I really want this to be a fluid conversation.
Yeah. I mean, and I feel like there's still been so much, because I do think it's triage. Like, I think because frankly, I mean, if we look just in my neighborhood, the Hunts Point section, I think it's been since 2008, the other financial crisis that we've been through fairly recently, we lost a tremendous amount of home ownership just in the Hunts Point area. I think it went from like around 20-ish. Now it's down to less than 7. So, but banks were too big to fail, but not the people who got a subprime. But, it's really always interesting to me. It's like, if you're like, there could be policies in place to protect people that already have homes from losing them. And I think that's like one of the first things that we could do. And for example, it's like, if you're accused of committing a crime, in this country, allegedly you get a public defender that hopefully will plead your case and help you, with that. But if you aren't aware of the value of your own home and a predatory speculator approaches you, there is nothing on the books that helps that family understands what they've just lost. And it happens so quickly. Like, why can't there be a public real estate defender? Especially since we know statistically that when a family loses an asset like that, they never really recoup anything like it. They literally, the opportunity for their future wealth generation is just gone for the most part. That's the way that it works. And so why isn't there something within our departments of finance when they see that kind of real estate transaction going across the books? Why can't there be a way to just, hey, maybe this person needs to understand what they have? Because we see it happen all over the country. And it's the same in lower status communities who lose that kind of asset. And but those are the kind of like really specific things that make me feel like those are the things that we need to be really focused on, is just a couple of them as well.
I agree there, but getting back to the education point, I think we need communities to be empowered to understand what's the terminology, the terms of art and industry, where power sectors are talking about these communities in terms that might be foreign to the communities, may not be as organic. We're talking about inclusionary zoning, for example, which is a highfalutin esoteric term, but I mean the effect of it is what we want. At least I'm speaking for my organization here. We're wanting the ability for folks to through the effects of public policy, to be able to stay in their communities in a way that's codified structurally, not just catch as catch can. Was I able to hold off, the speculator this time? I think we need a systemic
able to
instruction.
mandate it, right? Mandate the people that are living there to have the opportunity to stay there as everyone else is trying to come in and expand, right? In the same way, I guess, when we talk about making, institutions or buildings kind of like historic site, we want to make sure that we create space for folks that have been part of the community, that have built the community, been the fabric of what makes the community so attractive, really to make sure that they're able to remain there. I love that idea.
Yeah, I don't going to happen. There are a few ways I think that can happen, because right now, just depending on folks like seeing value and people of color, or it's just, that's not going to happen. So because it hasn't so far. But I feel like what could we possibly use, like some of the same tools that have actually been used in other sectors, to protect folks. Like, could the Security and Exchange Commission literally go, and to protect the wealth that's already there, but Black wealth in particular, frankly, because we know that that's that risk. Could they be considered a protected class? So
it's a great point.
Seriously, why? I mean, it has been done before. We could do that. I mean, but in pushing, those type of they are structural things that will get to the meat of it. Are there opportunities? Of course there are opportunities. We should consider ourselves developers, within our own communities, not just, and literally just, and be doing it. I think it's, I get really tired of hearing things like, in my own neighborhood, it's just like, all we need is more affordable housing. I'm like, yo, let me tell you, your affordable housing only lasts as long as that subsidy. And I guarantee you, for the 10, 15 years that subsidy has, the people who make the most money are not the folks living in that place. You will only be good for a long time. Why aren't we also advocating for much more opportunities for cheaper money, so that we can actually become developers ourselves and consider homeownership opportunities, so that we're actually building that? I think we also have that knowledge gap that you talked about before. It is like, we just can't often, I think, in low status neighborhoods, think of as things happening to us, not able to impact what's happening. We know, for example, the affordable housing industry in this country, there are real winners in that, right? It is the folks who have figured out how to make a butt ton of money off of the federal subsidies.
Which means there are losers as well in that kind of construct.
Yeah, they don't even have to build a quality product, but we've been conditioned to be like, all we need is more affordable housing. No.
We need to move from the thought of temporary, right, and kind of putting a Band-Aid on the problem right now, and think more strategically about permanence and how we continue to build and expand and create legacy for our communities and generational wealth. So I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the Black Homeownership Collaborative that NUL is a part of, and the 7-point plan to create 3 million new Black homeowners by 2030.
I mean, Jerica, it's a moonshot of an effort. I mean, it's one of those but-for things. I mean, the Black homeownership rate is lagging in historic ways. We're talking about, the same kind of homeownership rate that we were looking at in the late 60s. I mean, even though it's been tantamount to 2 steps forward, 1 step back, and not a linear gain for communities of color, I think, that what you and Majora are talking about is correct. The kind of past, the patchwork of policies, again, both public and private, that have systemically kept the Black homeownership rate hovering at and consistently below 50%, is criminal in my view. And so we've decided to launch a cross-sectoral collaborative, the Black Homeownership Collaborative, which is, again, running along the marketing, comms line around 3x30, 3by30.org. That's the website. We're trying to push 3 million net new Black homeowners by 2030. And again, the net is important because, we're looking into homeownership preservation as well. Majora talked about the last great unpleasantness where we lost, billions, in aggregate, billions of dollars of wealth in communities of color through no fault of their own in terms of the subprime meltdown. And so we're trying to kind of use those lessons from that era and the scaffolds that we put up since to double down on the things that we know that work. So, for example, there's a 7-point plan that we've proffered, that we have allies within government and outside of government. But the issue is, how can we, and we talked about, Majora talked about the protected classes. I mean, now, in this kind of post-George Floyd awakening, although I'm concerned that the door is shutting on that quite quickly, we need to be comfortable talking about focused policies that are for Black people. Right? And so special purpose credit products are for first-time homeowners of color. That should be a public policy stance that everyone feels comfortable getting behind. So 3x30 talks about down payment assistance for first-time homeowners of color. We're talking about housing production in the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, where we're talking about tax credits for investing in distressed and under-resourced communities, codifying that permanently. And we're looking at, building a robust nonprofit space that's not just providing social services, Jerica, but are also part of the brick and mortar conversation. Those nonprofits that build and acquire and build affordable housing, bringing it to the marketplace. We need a landscape where those folks, minority-led, minority-serving institutions, the front lines of this work, are having a say over what happens, again, block by block, tract by tract. We have a production problem in this country. We are in a deficit position to the tune of millions of units. And so if we don't get creative, if we don't look to adaptive reuse of manufacturing zones that we've talked about, or other institutional buildings. We're here down in Lower Manhattan in the financial district where all the bankers have fled and are doing their work remotely. This office space is underutilized. How can we look at zoning to be able to create affordable housing, but also market rate housing? We need a blend of housing choices, particularly in large central cities and these middle neighborhoods that exist within them. And so the Black Homeownership Collaborative is one, being intentional about what the design is for folks who have been semi-permanently locked out of the pre-purchase marketplace, and policy structurally set up for those households, which, as I remind you, are 2-gen, multi-gen households that may not have that of historic legacy experience with home ownership and how to attain it, how to sustain it. The collaborative is also investing in marketing and outreach. Again, through our housing counseling work, people ask us all the time, is it safe? I know just enough to know that there are actors working against us here. Is it safe to get into the home ownership game? And quite frankly, as housing counselors, as financial coaches, we have to tell them it's a fraught landscape. You need to be able to be informed, knowledgeable, sophisticated, and aggressive, and letting people know what you believe you can qualify for and what you need and want. And again, that after generations of being told no, getting to yes is an easy tell. And I think we need to create a permanence of households, communities that are strong in what they want, but also getting that kind of aggregate scaling of where we can unloose our policies so that we can see what we're advocating for. And the collaborative is trying to do just that. We're looking at advancing some initiatives in Memphis and Philadelphia and Houston, and we'll be in Houston later this year talking about this. But we need to put together a team of private sector actors, public sector allies, and make the case. I think that the time is now for encouraging people, and if it makes people uncomfortable, so be it. But this is our moment, our time to do this.
I've spent a lot of my time making people uncomfortable because I'm okay with it. But I was actually really happy, to hear you say that it wasn't just about, quote unquote, affordable housing, because that term, I think, is just so
You're
with
right.
everything. And all it really means, to when it gets right down to it from a real estate perspective, is that there are developers that are supported by our government, through all the subsidies that get funneled into them through for development fees, where it continues to concentrate poverty. And for the
Mm.
more community of colors, but also,
Mm-hmm.
frankly, poor communities too. And that concentration of poverty does more to exacerbate all the things that everybody says they want to not deal with, from health outcomes, educational attainment, all of it. But somehow or another, it stays the same because that's the kind of housing that continues to get built here. So I was really happy to hear you say that what this means is that it's not just about
Yeah.
creating affordable housing, and the home ownership piece is like front and center. And I
Right.
think for like homeowners of various income levels, because I think that is the thing where I think on so many different levels, especially in the Black community and other communities of color, brown ones in particular, we're like, poverty is authentic in our
Mm.
neighborhood. Like,
Mm.
who led us to believe
Mm.
somehow the only way our communities can actually be, and it's the
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing I get, where I know that make people uncomfortable, because I'm always talking about money and how do we make sure that we're creating more opportunities for our communities to benefit from it. The same way, I'm the same way that communities around, like, white folks have done since the 1600s when they first got,
Yeah,
they've been
it's a
entitled
great point.
Mm.
to support them. We did not have that. I'm all about, at this point, figuring out how do we make sure that we get a little piece of it as well. And it
Yeah.
is through policies, but it's also going to be through the kind of mindset changes that makes it so that us expecting to live in a place where poverty is not the cultural attribute
Mm.
that I think white supremacy has led us to believe
Mm.
level. And that's going to be the thing that will actually create the kind of help and healing in our community, so that we can feel like we can afford to be generous and gracious with our time, with our pocketbooks, with our community in general. Because otherwise, I'm just like, we are going to do the same thing. And it is about making sure that many of us are in the developer seat.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
am so,
Yeah.
but yeah,
Yeah.
I see the way and have seen the way, our communities have been developed, and they have not looked like us for the most part, the ones who are doing the bulk of it. And that has to be part of what we talk about. I don't care if it's just somebody owning like a little, 2-family home. They got a tenant, they should be considered a developer. They should be treated as a small business owner, period.
Mhm.
And we don't
I
give people that kind of
love that.
respect.
Yeah. I
But when we,
do.
yeah,
I love that.
Yeah. I want to address, because there's a lot of going on in the chat right now. And I think one of the things, the theme that I'm seeing is that there's a lot of skepticism when we're talking about the government. And I think you both kind of touched on that.
Mm-hmm.
People are feeling like and there's a lot of folks from Detroit on talking about how homeowners have accidentally been overtaxed in Detroit, how it's caused massive foreclosures, and there was never any compensation for those families. There's comments about reverse mortgages, and the impact that that's had on different
Yeah.
families. And so, part of the reason it was really important to have both of you on is to be able to talk about this issue and talk about creative ways that we as a community really can address these issues and build and move forward. So I just lifted those things up. I don't know if either of you want to chime in on any of those issues, but I want to make sure that we acknowledge and kind of respond to some of what we're seeing in the chat. Does anyone want to talk a little bit about reverse mortgages or any
Well,
other?
I'll just say that we're one of the nation's preeminent housing counseling organizations, and that is an area of work that we have chosen not to invest in, because again, it is fraught with peril. It is dependent upon somewhat of a of it gives the ability for predatory actors to prey on folks who are economically vulnerable, but at a kind of knowledge and sophistication deficit position, and people who are vulnerable and at crisis. And we are looking at a lot of Black wealth losses, and these predatory actors are unscrupulous in their practices. But reverse mortgages, and folks obviously in the chat either are involved in this process or know those who have been. It is an area that is very, very crisis filled, and it is an area that we've actively chosen not to get involved in because, again, it can be devolve into the wild west very quickly. What's happened in Detroit, Majora mentioned affected classes. I mean, that is a city that has been through the wars, as they've said, and the texture and contours of it have changed more or less overnight, in a short period of time. Neighborhoods and communities evolved and changed longitudinally over generations. But Detroit has been, planned shrinkage, unplugging folks from the grid, and seeing ownership patterns in both home ownership and small business ownership, change and as a result of land use policies and patterns. Detroit is the poster child for urban pathologies that we're talking about here. And again, our affiliate there is in the front lines of this work. I wish we could do more. We should be doing more, quite frankly, the league there.
Great. Majora, thank you so much for that, Sai. And I think there were some echoes in that. Folks talked about Detroit at one point being at the height of Black home ownership.
Yes.
And that now it is one of the lowest. Folks were asking, can you reverse a reverse mortgage? Obviously, this is something that there's a lot of energy and interest behind. Majora, I do want to lift up your book. Your book is Reclaiming Your Community. You don't have to move out of your neighborhood to live in a better one. And I just wanted to give you some space if there are any highlights or ideas or thoughts that you've shared in that book that you want to lift up for the folks on this call. I know we're coming to a close, but I really want to go to you and Sai and just see if there are some really important nuggets that you want to share with those who've tuned in.
The fact that, so I'm super excited. The book's been out for a little over a year now, and it's doing really, really well. And I hear from folks every day who come from neighborhoods like mine around the country, actually around the world, who have decided that they can act, that they're not crazy for feeling as though creating more hope and opportunity in their own community through a kind of talent retention strategy, like I advocate for in my book through my own work, has been so encouraging. But I really do believe that the bulk of it is about recognizing that our communities have value while we are in them. And that is something that white supremacy has told us that on some level, many of us believe, and we're seeing the impact of it. And I'm not discounting any of the systemic bias and the racism, the structural racism that makes our life real and hard, but on some level, there is a kernel of it makes us doubt that our neighborhoods are all there for us, and that's why to think elsewhere. But the fact that many of us are going back and going, we're going to stay here. We're going to build where we are planted. We're going to create the kind of health and well-being, and in particular, economically, because we deserve that. We need to be the ones who are making that investment in ourselves because we deserve it. That is like one of the best things that has come out of writing this book and sharing, the story of a kid who did want to run away from her neighborhood and actually effectively did, to come back and then decide that the investment that my life was going to be in it would also inspire other folks as well. So
I love that.
I'm super excited about, the plan that y'all are putting out there, because, to put the meat on the bones, of this, so that folks can actually do something with it and deconcentrate poverty. So and again, literally deconcentrate. So it's not just a bunch of poor folks living in one place, because we know that doesn't help anybody, any of them. It just doesn't statistically. So that is such a powerful, approach to take. And then, the other ones are just like, how do we, bring in other folks to make it so that they're partners in this, and not just like talking and talking, whether it's philanthropy, the government, the nonprofit sector, who love, to, manage problems in our community versus actually, creating real reasons, for things to change. Could you imagine if philanthropy decided to do the same kind of role? Because we all know they could, especially the big ones.
Yeah.
If they wanted to, like, instead of like letting private equity real estate companies just come in and be private, and buy homes for cash. How about if philanthropy did that? Except they paid a fair price.
Mm.
Hold on to those for those properties.
That'd be a game
Just
changer.
so that people could get people in those communities could actually get a mortgage to buy a house.
Yeah.
Not like people in our neighborhoods can't afford to buy
Right.
a house, but many they don't, but they cannot match the speed of a predatory speculator. None of us can.
Great point. It's a great point. That would be a game changer, Majora.
Yeah.
Just to be able to compete with the BlackRocks of the world, to acquire these homes, and then you can permanently create affordability through that. But you're right, philanthropy has a role to play. They'll be on the sidelines at this point. You're right.
I've been preaching that for a year, and not one philanthropy has said anything like, "Oh, that's a good idea." I know it's a good idea. They know it's a good idea too. But again, most philanthropy won't acknowledge, their own white supremacist roots.
That's deep.
There.
Yeah.
Well, we need to bring her back to a conference side, because she's done it before. We'll line her up in front of, right? We need to make
that's
sure.
standing ovation territory there. No, I'm with you on that. But again, the schizophrenia in the funding world, in the philanthropic world, they fund something on Monday, reaffirm it Wednesday, and move on to something else by Friday. That's not sustainable, and that's not committed to the interest of our community. You're right.
Sorry. That is how they do it. They make you feel like you're crazy.
Yes.
Not crazy.
Yes.
They're being them, boo.
Yep.
That's what's.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Yep.
And I'm sorry. I don't care. I got nothing to lose. They never funded me to begin with. So here I am.
Well, I'm with you on that one.
Well, look, we appreciate your truth telling, Majora, and really your framing, reminding us all how personal this is. I think we all have a story in our family, or are connected to someone else or another family member that has gone through it, but it's really personal.
Yeah.
And it's and I think just kind of what we're seeing from the chat, folks feel like those that they've engaged in and other bodies and groups and whether it's electeds or others, are not understanding that and realizing that and seeing that and responding and engaging in a way. But that's the one thing we do need to continue to underscore. It's about us. It's about our communities. It's real.
And
it's not just moving things on paper. Real lives are impacted by it.
And I do want to say, because the reverse mortgage thing, there was a reason why I was kind of quiet when it happened, but my family also went through a reverse mortgage, and it was one of those things where you just see your, like,
the wealth,
just
the equity. And in many cases, it's female-headed households who have outlived their spouse, and again, the vestige of just the generational roles that are played in the Black community. It's asking a lot for someone who may not have managed the household balance sheet to make that kind of existential decision on the largest asset that they will have ever had. And the equity stripping in there, as I say, is criminal. It's a third rail. We don't touch it.
Yeah. And it was, going back to your piece, about the knowledge gap, it actually, my mother, unfortunately, was like, she had already developed Alzheimer's, and I had other siblings who thought this was a good idea. And I was like, I don't think so, but I was completely overruled.
Yeah.
And she died very quickly after that.
That's tragic.
Yeah, exactly. But my story is probably nothing compared to so many others, and it's just one, but there's so many, and they keep happening, and that's what kills me, that it just keeps happening.
Yeah.
And have the tools to not do it.
Yeah.
We really do.
Yeah. We do. But I think that also speaks to the social capital potential in our community that we may be resource deficient in some areas financially, but the social capital, the connectedness, the networks in the Black community far outpace, other groups. And in this case, they can be harnessed for the good. That is the good advice that can be paid forward. So other folks, to your point, don't make those same mistakes. We have that within our power to execute that kind of collegiality and mutuality. And I think we need to kind of double down on that social capital. We're really good at that kind of bonding social capital within our community. We need to be able to bridge outside that to talk to other allies around what's happening to our communities, learn what's happening in other communities, and then, move forward, put our shoulder into it. I'm with you.
Yes.
I love it.
Likewise.
Yeah, we have to know better in order to do better, and then we're continuing to learn and grow.
Yep.
So, Sai, 1 minute kind of final thought for our audience, and then Majora, if you had one final thought, would love to hear from you both before we close out this evening.
Well, I just, really want to kind of, sorry to be late, but I'll end where I began in that, we are dealing with, arresting, the numerous kind of gaps that exist between white America and communities of color in this country. Again, we're talking about our North Star is the intergenerational wealth gap. That's what we're trying to understand and narrow. But again, a lot of, antecedents go into that formula. We're talking about the homeownership gap. We're talking about the knowledge gap, the sophistication gap. We're also talking about institutionally. We have some communities that are, disconnected, dislocated from the mainstream systems of civil society. We need to do more in terms of, turning on individuals that can become community leaders. You don't have to have a title to lead, but you need to be able to feel, strong in your convictions. And again, you've earned the right to be heard. Again, orally or in writing and written form or through actions. We need to expend shoe leather on this issue around wealth preservation. And again, that's in the Urban League's DNA, 113 years strong. We'll continue to do that. We are a ship at sea, Jerica, that will never reach port. This is our work. And so we have to just pay that forward. And again, we're on the streets every day leaning into these issues. We'll continue to do that.
Amen.
Thank you, Sai. And if there's any guidance you have for folks that want to tap into league resources across the country, is there any guidance where they should go? Should they just go to nul.org and be able to connect?
They should come right to me, nul.org, and get me at my desk here. I'm waiting for that call. But also, again, 3x30. It's catchy, but that is what we are endeavoring to do. We are really shooting for the moon here. But again, getting the Black homeownership rate back to 50% is just the beginning. It's just that's the floor. Okay, the ceiling has not been written yet. We'll get there.
I love that, Majora.
Literally, what else can I say? We need to be reclaiming our communities. Shouldn't have to move out of our neighborhoods to
claiming.
I love that. So leadership is action, not position. We don't just need a title. We need just people that care to stand up, educate themselves, get involved, and bring others along in their community. 3x30, we got that.
Yep.
And then really, we have to reclaim our communities. And we don't have to move out of the neighborhood to make it a place that we want to live in and grow. So thank you both. This has been such a great conversation for me. I learned a lot. I know I will continue to learn a lot from you all on my own home ownership journey. I just got started out, but there's more to learn. So I'm asking these questions along with the folks on here. But thank you both for your leadership. Thank you for your commitment to our community. And thank you for your work. To all of us, all of those who have joined us for this conversation, we thank you. We appreciate you. We hope you've learned something. And please feel free to go out and share what you've learned today. Share. You can go to YouTube, the National Urban League's YouTube page, or you can point people to this IG Live. I think there is such a wealth of information. We want to make sure that everyone that can get their hands on it does. I'll say this conversation is to be continued because there's a lot more for us to unpack.
Yep.
But thanks everyone for joining us. And remember, the time for justice is always now. Take care and have a great evening.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks, Sai. Thanks, Majora.
Thank you.